I pressed play, and my whole world tilted. The screen showed my living room, the exact couch where my favorite blanket always lay. It was 3 in the afternoon, the sun pouring in through the big window. I had never planned to watch this clip again, but my hands were shaking as if someone else held them. The woman I had trusted with everything, my nanny Amara, stood in the doorway. She didn't look like herself. Her face was tight. Her eyes flicked around like she feared being caught. She took the blanket and folded it carefully. Then she opened the small wooden box on the coffee table. My heart stopped. That box held my mother's necklace, the one I'd worn to school the day she died. I had watched Amara tuck the chain into her pocket like it was paper. She smiled at the camera, sweet and practiced, and mouthed sorry. I felt like someone had ripped open my chest. I knew then that trust was a lie. I screamed into the empty house, but the scream on screen was quiet. The clip ended, but my mind kept replaying that mouth, sorry. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling. If she could take my mother's necklace, what else had she taken? The front door was unlocked. I remember the exact smell of the living room, lemon cleaner and cinnamon from the candles Amara burned. That smell turned cold in my memory. I ran to my bedroom where the other camera's live feed blinked green. The hallway looked normal, too normal. My stomach curled. I dialed her number with hands that didn't obey me. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Her voice was always warm on messages. This time there was silence. My throat was tight and my mouth tasted like pennies. I pulled the photos from my mind, Amara laughing with my little brother at breakfast, smoothing my bed covers, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. She had been our family for 3 years. How could she do this? I texted Mom 20 times, but she was at work and didn't answer. Panic grew teeth in my chest. I shoved the phone into my pocket and walked to the backyard. The gate was slightly open, the latch eaten away with rust. Someone had been here. Someone had been in our house while we were supposed to be safe. I felt exposed, like my home had been turned inside out. I needed proof. I needed to know when she had done it and why. I booted up the Ring app and pulled a list of recordings. My hands trembled as I skimmed timestamps. There were clips from the last week, at the same time every day. My mouth went dry when I saw that Amara had stayed after she claimed she'd left. She smiled into the camera at exactly 9:12 p.m. on Tuesday, then again at 9:12 p.m. on Thursday. But the clip that made me drop the phone was from last Sunday at 2:03 a.m. The house was dark. The screen showed only the glow from the streetlight, then a shadow moved. A figure crept through the door like it belonged there. Amara. She held a flashlight in her teeth and whispered to someone I couldn't see. She opened the hall closet, rifled through the box of old letters, and pulled out an envelope. She read it, and then laughed, soft and cruel. She placed the envelope into her bag and left. My heart hammered, so hard that my ears rang. That envelope was the one with my mother's name scribbled in my father's handwriting. I had sworn to keep it safe. I had trusted Amara to protect our home. The footage was not just proof of theft, it was betrayal caught on film. I felt sick and furious, the two mixing into something sharp and animal inside me. I couldn't let her get away with this. I called my father, but he couldn't come home for hours. He was a nurse on the night shift and could not just leave. I had to act fast. I scrolled through more footage, mapping her pattern like a criminal profiler. She moved with care, almost ritualistic. Lights left off, shoes at the door, the TV muted. She had a routine. Check the nursery, fold the laundry, empty the jewelry box. I watched clip after clip, each a new cut. The worst part was her face. I saw her kindness in earlier videos, holding my brother's hand, seeking his little smile. It made the betrayal worse. I printed screenshots at the library printer 2 blocks away because I wanted something solid in my hands. The paper smelled like toner and fear. I taped the images to my bedroom wall, laying them out like a case detective. My brother, Kofi, came home from school and asked why I had so many photos. I lied. I said I was doing a project. He believed me. He still saw her as sunshine. I couldn't let him understand yet. I needed the right plan to confront her and keep my brother safe. I needed to find what else she had taken. That night I stayed awake on the couch with the TV on mute. I set the phone to record new clips. Every sound was huge. The clock ticking, the fridge humming, the house settling. At 1:17 a.m. the front door opened. My feet were frozen to the floor. Amara walked in carrying a paper bag, humming softly to herself. I recorded without moving. She moved slowly, careful not to disturb sleeping people in the house. She placed the bag on the counter, then walked to the little shrine I had made for my mother. Photos, the dried flowers, the candle. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the framed picture. Then she touched the photo like she was apologizing to someone unseen. A soft sob escaped her, and for a second I thought maybe there was pain behind her theft. Then she opened the bag and pulled out several rings, small items I recognized from the jewelry box. She began to place them into a cloth pouch. My anger rose like a flood. How could she justify doing this while she held grief like that? I wanted to slam the door open, to scream, to accuse. But I stayed hidden, studying her like she was a map I needed to decode. As she turned to leave, she paused, looked right at the camera, and mouthed, "Forgive me." I felt the house tilt again. The next morning I confronted her with the evidence taped to my wall. Amara stood in the kitchen, wiping a dish with slow, steady movements. She looked composed, but her fingers left little soap crescents on the towel. I laid out the screenshots like cards on a table. Her face did not harden. It folded in a different way. Surprise, then resignation. "Favour," she said softly, using my name with the same careful tone she always used. I told her about the necklace, the letters, the envelope she'd read. She closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought maybe she would apologize. Instead, she told me a story. She said my mother had once helped her when she was young, that my mother had given her a key to her past, a name that mattered, a promise to remember. She said she took only things that reminded her of that debt. The words sounded like paper wings crashing to the floor. She wasn't denying it. She was claiming some right older than our grief. I felt cheated by her moral logic. I wanted justice, but my anger wrestled with the memory of her soft hands smoothing my brother's hair. "Give them back," I demanded. She nodded slowly, but there was something in her eyes, a secret she wasn't telling. She led me to the garage, where the smell of motor oil met the lemon of the house. She reached into a box under an old blanket and drew out a wooden jewelry organizer. The necklace was there, but it looked different, tarnished, as if it had been kept in a pocket. My breath came shallow. "I wanted to keep it safe," she said. "I thought if I held it, no one else would misuse it." Her explanation was soft, fragile like the glass ornaments on our shelf. I wanted to believe her and smash the organizer at the same time. I reached out and took the chain back. It was cool in my palm, and a wave of relief washed through me. But something wasn't right. In the box under the organizer, I found a small stack of letters, love letters, but not ours. Names I knew, names I didn't. Dates scribbled years before our family moved in. It was like a second life folded into paper. I asked where she had gotten them. Her mouth pressed thin. "From the attic," she said. "They should have been burned." She said the most dangerous thing, that someone had been asking about those papers. My skin prickled. Who else knew our house that well? I started to ask questions of people who had known my mother. She had been a teacher in our neighborhood before she died. Her students remembered her laugh, her way of fixing a kite, the story she told about islands across the sea. I visited an old neighbor, Mrs. Okoye, who kept a garden full of marigolds and secrets. She sipped tea and listened to my story with slow, careful eyes. "People keep things," she said. "Sometimes they vanish because they were needed elsewhere." She didn't answer the question about other visitors to our house. My father called from work, and his voice on the phone was tinny and distant. He asked if I had confronted Amara. I lied, said everything was fine. I couldn't tell him the truth. It would make him furious and risk losing his job. I started to notice small oddities. The gate latch that had been repaired last month looked new again, a footprint in the mud by the shed that didn't match any shoes in our house. The sense of being watched spread like cold water. I began to dread the sound of the mail slot, the creak of the stairs. Someone had come into our life and rearranged it. I was determined to find out who, but I felt small and alone. I set a new trap. I left the living room camera recording and placed a fake envelope in the jewelry box, a paper with my mother's handwriting copied clumsily from older notes. Inside I put nothing but a dried petal, worthless to anyone but me. I told no one. The next night I went to bed but sat up for hours, listening for a step. At 2:04 a.m. the camera caught movement. The shadow at the door, the soft click of shoes on wood. Amara appeared, careful and practiced. She opened the box, took the envelope, smiled at the camera and walked out. But she wasn't alone. When she crossed the threshold, a second figure slipped behind her, like a stain joining water. I froze. The person's face was hidden under a hood, but the hands were familiar, sturdy, with a ring on the left pinky that I'd seen once at a neighborhood meeting. My stomach dropped. The clip ended with the two of them disappearing into the night. I rewound and watched the entrance again and again, trying to catch a glimpse. The ring gleamed. I felt a cold rage and fear like two animals growling in my chest. Whoever that was, they were not a stranger. They were a neighbor, someone who knew our names. I became a detective of small things. I checked the neighborhood online groups, hoping for a clue. A woman named Ada posted about a lost box of keepsakes taken from an old house near the corner. Her description was vague, but she mentioned a light-footed helper. I recognized the writing from the meetings. Had that ring belonged to her husband? I decided to follow the only lead I had. The house she described was one I passed every day on the way to school. I watched from behind a bush and waited. The woman who opened the door had hair braided tight like maps and a cold smile. She carried a tote bag with paint stains and smelled of wood polish. I snapped a picture. Later, when I looked at the photo, I noticed the same pinky ring glinting in the sun. My chest constricted. I realized she could be the person at my door with Amara that night. I had proof, but it felt thin, like a thread that could break if I pulled too hard. I needed something stronger, something that would tie them together without letting them slip away. I showed the photo to my best friend, Tund, who had a calm face that never betrayed him. He listened and then did something I didn't expect. He went to the hardware store and bought a cheap bug detector. If they're meeting, they might use a phone outside, he said. He hooked the detector to the camera feed and we sat in my yard, pretending to do homework, but really watching. That night, at 1:58 a.m., a faint ping registered on the device. Someone had used a signal near the back gate. My heart raced. The camera caught a flash of movement, and the woman with the paint-splattered tote slipped into the yard, followed by Amara. They moved toward the shed. They opened it, and I saw them take boxes, passing things between them with a speed that made my stomach drop. But then a twist. They stopped and argued. Amara looked worried, the other woman furious. Voices were low, but I could hear one sentence. "You promised you'd keep it hidden." The other voice snapped. "Promises end when money starts." I felt like the floor had dropped beneath me. The theft was not about memories or gratitude. It was about profit. I pressed my hands to my mouth to stop from shouting. They left without noticing the camera. The cliffhanger wrapped me in dread. I needed to know how long this had been going on and whether the people involved had stakes higher than jewelry. I hacked together a simple timeline from the camera dates and notes from Tund's detector. The thefts had been happening for months, maybe years. Amara had been operating like a careful person, sometimes alone, sometimes with a paint-stained woman. The letters we found in the garage belonged to different families, some with names I recognized from the town's older history. These were not small trinkets, they were pieces of people's past. I took the list to the library and pored over old newspapers. I found a small article about a foreclosure on a house 3 blocks away, an elderly woman forced to sell and leave. The article mentioned missing family papers. My stomach tightened. This was a pattern. Homes getting emptied, memories taken. I felt a fierce anger for the helpless people who had lost more than furniture. I promised myself I would not be one of them. I would not let our grief be packaged and sold. But when I returned home, a new clip awaited me on the Ring app. This one showed my father arriving early, carrying a box. He put it in the trunk of his car. My chest convulsed. The timeline bent in a way I hadn't expected. I watched the clip until the light bled out of the screen. My father had been unloading boxes from our attic, the ones labeled old papers. He had stopped to take a call. Whoever was on the line asked him if the boxes had been moved, and he answered, "No, they're still here." The voice on the other end sounded like someone trying not to laugh. After the call, he closed the attic and drove to the hospital. I felt a weird twist of fear. Could he be involved? No, My father loved my mother's things like they were breathing. He would never sell them. But cameras don't lie. I confronted him in the kitchen that night, my voice suddenly loud. He looked at me like I had confusion written all over my face. I put those boxes away because we were cleaning, he said. His eyes were tired. He promised me he hadn't touched the jewelry or the letters. He looked hurt that I doubted him. I wanted to believe him. But even as I nodded, a sliver of doubt lodged inside me. Was someone using my father's routine, his late shifts as cover? I decided to track his phone location the next night. Maybe that would clear things up. The screen gave me an answer I hadn't wanted. My father's phone pinged near the Old Market at 10:09 p.m., the same time one of our missing boxes had appeared in a pawn shop 2 streets over. He called me from the hospital at 10:30 p.m. asking how homework was going, his voice fake bright. I stared at the map and felt like I was watching him walk away. I confronted him again, tears hot and sudden. He broke then, not in anger but in confession. He admitted to visiting the market last month to ask about a job. He'd met a man who offered cash for household odds, a man who said he could help with the bills. He had left the boxes in a van for safekeeping and thought they'd be fine. My anger turned into a sticky mix of betrayal and sadness. His choices had opened our home to others. He whispered that he didn't want us to be hungry. I wanted to be furious and hold him and tell him it would be okay. I did neither. The truth was a blade. He had been trying to fix things and ended up breaking us further. Outside, a truck engine rumbled and I realized the problem was bigger. The pawn shop gave me a lead. A man named Obi took the items and sold them to a buyer who lived in a row of gray houses near the river. The buyer's name came up on a list of small-time sellers who traded in old things, not always asking questions. I followed the trail and found a shed full of boxes, each labeled with names and dates. It was like a graveyard for memories. The buyer was a lanky man with tired eyes who shrugged when I confronted him. He said he bought items like toys, jewelry, papers, anything someone offered. He had sold things on the internet and to dealers who paid more. The hardest part was when I saw our letters stacked with others. They were a sea of lives chopped up. The man offered me money to take them, but I refused. I wanted to put them back together, to stitch our stories back. He cracked a smile that felt like teeth. People forget things, he said. We make them worth something. I left with a list of buyers and a number pasted to the back of my hand. The list led to whispers in the market, names of collectors who prized old letters. Every lead brought me closer to a network that had turned grief into profit. I realized I needed help. I recruited Tund to help me gather evidence. We made a plan, follow buyers, record meetings, and get names. Tund, with his calm face, kept a steady hand as I rattled off everything I had. He suggested we play buyers ourselves, pretend to have items to sell. It was dangerous, but I felt a fierce clarity. The first call we placed landed us an invite to a warehouse where men traded things in the dead of night. Tund's voice was steady on the phone, and my stomach hollowed with fear. The place smelled of diesel and old paper. Men moved like shadows. We saw boxes labeled with street names I knew, some even with my mother's last note tucked inside. One of the men, thick-set, ring on his pinky, argued loudly about price. He was the same man we saw in the camera with Amara. He had a nickname, Pinky. I wanted to step forward, to shout and take back what belonged to us, but Tund grabbed my arm. He whispered the only thing that kept us alive, get proof, then go to the police. We left with our hearts pounding and a single recording hidden inside Tund's jacket. The clip captured a name, a voice, and the smell of someone buying memories like garbage. We took the recordings to the police but found a cold bureaucracy instead of help. The officer showed them scribbled notes, his eyes sliding over the paper as if looking for a simpler case. This is theft, he finally said. But without a clear chain of custody, it's messy. He suggested filing a report and waiting. Waiting felt like feeding a fire. I stormed out angry, but Tund held my hand and forced patience into me. That night someone left a note under our door, a single line, typed in blunt. Mind your house. Fear slammed into me like a fist. I tried to sleep, but images of the warehouse and the faces of men refusing to look me in the eye followed me. The next morning Amara didn't come to work. My brother asked where she was, and I felt guilty because I kept going to the police instead of being honest with him. Then a package arrived on our doorstep, a small wooden box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was a single ring and a note. Return what is ours. The handwriting wasn't Amara's. It was neat and patient, like someone who had time to plan things. The cliffhanger of the note made my fear sharpen into something I could aim for. I confronted Amara with the note. She stood in the doorway with her coat on, hence trembling a little. I asked where she'd been, who she'd met, and if she knew the man called Pinky. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. I lost my brother, she said without looking at me. He used to keep things safe for us. He was taken from me. The confession fell into the room like rainfall. She said Pinky had once protected her family but then changed, and he started asking for items and trading them for secrets. She said she stole because she thought it would help keep the bad men away from her brother. The explanation hurt in a complicated way. It didn't excuse her, but it made her human in a new, messy way. She gave me a name, Obena, a middleman who handled special items. He had been seen in the market with the ringed man. I wrote the name down and felt like the story was folding into something I could handle. As I left to chase this lead, my phone buzzed. A new clip was uploaded from the living room camera. I opened it and saw my brother asleep, the camera panning slightly, then the feed cut to black. The black screen stayed for a long minute. I felt the room's walls narrowing. Tun called and his voice was urgent. The feed had been hacked. Someone had cut the link to our Ring app. Panic was a cold animal in my chest. I ran to the router and found it unplugged, coiled like a sleeping snake under the table. My hands shook as I plugged it back in. The app flickered to life with a backlog of footage I hadn't seen. Footage from the last month had been edited, clips missing, times altered. Someone had been cleaning tracks. The footage we had was now the only proof left. I realized we had to move faster. I called Obena's number, the one Amara had given me, and the voice on the line was cautious and low. He invited me to a coffee shop by the river at noon. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like the only chance to hear the truth. I grabbed my coat and the jewelry box with the necklace inside. My hands knocked as I walked to the door. At the gate, I saw a shadow move across the street and froze. At the coffee shop, Obena looked older than I expected. Tired eyes, a scar like a crescent on his eyebrow. He stirred his coffee with care. He spoke in measured tones and told me things that complicated my anger. Pinky had started as a rival who sold old things on the web, but he had become greedy, moving from items to people's secrets. Obena said Pinky had a warehouse where he kept special things for high-paying buyers. He claimed he'd tried to stop Pinky but had been threatened. He said Amara was not a mastermind. She was a small player frightened into service. He pointed a finger at me when he said, "You have to be careful how you fight back." His words hinted at a price I wasn't ready to pay. He offered help in exchange for us keeping quiet about something he called the ledger, a book that listed buyers and items. My gut told me he wasn't fully honest. I left the coffee shop with a plan to find Pinky's warehouse myself. But when I got home, the living room looked different. The photograph of my mother had been moved. The photo was not just moved, it was gone from its frame. The glass was empty. My breath left me. Someone had taken the picture while I was away. The house felt violated in a way that words couldn't hold. I turned the rooms upside down, searching like a person trying to find themselves. I emailed the police again, pressed for a quicker response. They promised a patrol. While waiting, I checked the back alley and found footprints that led to a drainage pipe. The prints were small, like someone trying to disguise size. Maybe a child, maybe someone who knew how to hide. My head buzzed with questions. Why steal a photo? What do they want with our faces? That night, I set a new trap. I put the necklace in my pocket and placed an old camera facing the hallway, disguised as a lamp. I needed to catch whoever came back. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of my mother's smile and how easily people had handled it like something to pawn. When the lamp's camera blinked awake at 2:11 a.m., I saw the silhouette of a person small and quick. It moved to the mantel, reached into the frame, and stole the photo. The person was my brother's height. My stomach dropped. The silhouette had the slight slouch of Kofi, my brother. I threw open the bedroom door. He stood there with the photograph clutched in his hands and a look on his face like someone who had swallowed a secret. Kofi! My voice was more brittle than I wanted. He looked guilty, then defiant. I found it, he said. They said they needed it. Tears came fast and hot. He told me, between hiccups, that a boy from down the street had been coming by and asking for things that looked like family. He said the boy said it would help him pay for medicine for his mother. Kofi admitted he handed over the photo in exchange for a small packet of money and a promise that the boy would return the items. My anger flared, but beneath it was a deep ache. Kofi was 12. He wanted to help, and he chose wrong. I hugged him hard and felt us both tremble. I promised I would fix it, but outside the window, headlights flashed and a car idled at the curb. Someone was waiting. The cliffhanger was a ringing threat. The car belonged to a woman with paint-stained hands, the same one with the pinky ring. She stepped out and looked at our house like a queen inspecting a new territory. I watched from the blinds, gripping the curtain until my knuckles were white. She knocked, and when I opened the door, she smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You have pretty things," she said, stepping inside without waiting. She introduced herself as Ada. I'd seen her name online, and sat like she owned the couch. She asked questions about where my father worked, what times we left the house, and if I lived alone during the day. Her voice was casual, but I felt targeted. I offered her tea, and she sipped it like she measured my life. Then she leaned forward and said, "You know the market isn't safe for small people." Her words felt like a warning and a challenge. I felt my anger bubble into a plan. I had to stop them, but I couldn't do it alone. I told her I wanted to sell some old items, and invited her to the warehouse she claimed to trade with. Her smile widened. She accepted. I had set a trap, but now I wondered who would get caught. We went at dusk with Tund and Kofi hidden in the car. My heart pounded like a child running to hide, and Ada escorted us through a fence into an abandoned lot. The warehouse loomed like something grieving its own end. Inside, men moved like ghosts. Ada introduced us to Pinky. He looked like every cruel story. Quick eyes, a ringed hand, a laugh that grated. He reached into a crate and pulled out a box of letters, then turned to me and smirked. "You have spunk," he said. I kept my voice steady and asked him questions, where he got the items, who bought them, and whether he had a ledger. He laughed and said papers didn't matter. Suddenly a man behind us made a move. Tun stepped forward and a scuffle started. Boxes toppled and letters flew like dead birds. In the chaos, I saw Ada reach for a crate and pull out a battered book, the ledger. Tun shouted my name and the men froze. It was the moment I had hoped for, proof in hand, men exposed. But then a hand clamped over my mouth and the world went black. I woke to sunlight stabbing my eyes and a siren in the distance. The police had come, finally, drawn by someone who had called in a tip. Tun had slipped away and called them, risking his own safety. Pinky and his men were cuffed. Ada was shaking but alive, and Amara sat on a crate with her head in her hands. The ledger lay open on a table, listing buyers, sellers, and pictures taped next to entries, my mother's necklace among them. The officers sorted through evidence, eyes widening. My father arrived, guilt on his face, and I forgave him the way a house forgives a storm. The necklace was returned to me, warm and familiar. Amara apologized, not with words that excused her, but with a truth. She had been trying to protect someone she loved and had lost her way. The police promised to trace the buyers and return what they could. In the days after, neighbors came forward with things they recognized, and my house felt slowly stitched back together. I kept replaying the footage that had made me scream, the moment of betrayal, and realized that the scream had been a turning point. It had turned fear into action and broken a small network built on other people's grief. At the end, I sat with Kofi and we opened the wooden box together. We had our mother's things, messy and human and whole again. Justice was not clean, it left scars, but it brought back what mattered most. Our memory, our trust rebuilt slowly, carefully, like a house repaired one nail at a time. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.